There was a king who spent only 6 months in England, but became one of the most famous names in English history. He threw himself into history's greatest adventure, but the result wasn't at all what he expected. This is the story of a king full of contradictions, an experienced warrior and a controversial leader. Tonight, together, we will discover the true story of one of the Middle Ages' most controversial figures. We will tell the life story of Richard the Lionheart, lost between legends and truths, sometimes praised as a hero, sometimes criticized. Before moving to our video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and mention in the comments where you're following us from. Now let's dive together into the Lionheart's world. Born on September 8th, 1157, at Beaumont Palace in Oxford, Richard was the child of one of the most powerful dynasties of the period. His father, Henry II, was the founder of the Angevin Empire and ruled territories stretching from England to the Pyrenees. His mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, was one of Europe's most powerful and cultured women. Eleanor wasn't just a queen, but also a patron of the troubadour tradition and an influential figure in medieval literature. Richard was the third of 5 brothers. His older brothers were Henry the Young King and Geoffrey Count of Brittany. His younger brothers were John, who would become future King of England, and Geoffrey, who died early in war. Rivalry between male children in the Angevin dynasty was traditional. Each tried to grab a share from the father's inheritance, which caused constant internal conflicts. Richard, whose childhood passed in Poitiers, grew up under his mother's influence. Eleanor's court was the brightest cultural center of that period. Troubadours sang their songs here. Poets presented their works. Knights learned the intricacies of courtly love tradition. This environment enabled Richard to grow up as both a warrior and cultured personality. At 11 years old, he inherited the Duchy of Aquitaine. This wasn't just a symbolic title. He had truly become one of southwestern France's biggest feudal lords. In 1172, he was officially declared Duke of Aquitaine at a ceremony held in Poitiers. The 15-year-old young duke now had to govern his own lands. Governing Aquitaine wasn't easy. The region was constantly in rebellion. Feudal lords didn't want to recognize central authority. Richard took harsh measures against these difficulties. At 16 years old, he directed his first military operation and defeated rebellious barons. This early success was the first indicator of his military abilities. In 1173, the Great Family Rebellion began. Eleanor, together with 3 older sons, rose against Henry II. Richard was also part of this rebellion. But the rebellion ended in failure. Eleanor was captured and imprisoned for long years. This event permanently damaged Richard's relationship with his father. In the following years, Richard consolidated his power in Aquitaine. He captured all important castles in the region, defeated rebel barons one by one. His military tactic was harsh but effective. He showed no mercy to those who opposed. During this period, he laid the foundations of the Lionheart nickname. When his older brother Henry the Young King died in 1183, Richard became heir to the English throne. But his father didn't call him to England, wanted him to stay in Aquitaine. This situation bothered Richard because he didn't know England at all and had no relationship with English nobles. When Henry II died in 1189, Richard was a 32-year-old experienced warrior. His arrival in England was awaited with great curiosity. The coronation ceremony was done magnificently at Westminster Abbey. But the new king saw England only as a resource to collect money for the crusade. Richard's only obsession was Jerusalem. Saladin's capture of Jerusalem in 1187 had created shock effect in Christian Europe. Pope Gregory VIII had declared the Third Crusade. Richard enthusiastically responded to this call. Crusade preparations required enormous resources. Richard sold everything for this money. He put offices and positions up for auction, increased taxes, disposed of royal property. With his famous attributed words, it was clear he saw England only as money source. This approach disturbed English nobles, but Richard didn't care. In 1190, he met with French King Philip II Augustus at Vézelay. The two kings would go on crusade together, but there was secret rivalry between them. Philip was looking for opportunity to capture Richard's lands in France. Richard was behaving ambitiously about crusade leadership. First stop was Sicily. They would spend winter here when spring came sail to the Holy Land. In Sicily, Richard experienced serious problems with local government. Despite his sister Joanna being Queen of Sicily, the new King Tancred treated her hostilely. Tension escalated in Messina. Conflicts broke out between Richard's soldiers and Sicilian people. The situation got so bad that Richard besieged and captured the city. This event showed he was more warrior than diplomat. In spring 1191, they stopped at Cyprus. Isaac Comnenus was ruling the island that had broken away from Byzantine Empire. Isaac had seized English ships that hit Cyprus shores in storm, taken his men prisoner. Richard didn't accept this situation. The Cyprus operation showed Richard's military ability. He systematically captured the island. He captured Isaac and brought the entire island under English control. This victory was important, not only militarily, but also economically. Cyprus's riches contributed to crusade financing. In Cyprus, Richard married Berengaria of Navarre. This marriage was a political agreement and resulted more from strategic calculations than Richard's personal preference. Berengaria was a beautiful and intelligent woman, but it was clear there was no real love between her and Richard. In June 1191, they finally reached Acre. The city had been under siege by Crusader forces for nearly 2 years, but hadn't been captured. Richard's arrival brought new dynamic to the siege. He set up siege engines, started systematic bombardment. The Acre siege was a complex operation. The city was surrounded by strong walls, and Saladin's forces were pressing the besiegers from outside. During this 2-year siege, thousands of Crusaders had lost their lives. Richard's arrival gave new momentum to the operation. Richard had siege engines set up and started systematic bombardment. The giant catapult he named Malvoisin constantly pounded the city walls. At the same time, tunnels were dug and attack plans were made from under the walls. This tactical combination broke the morale of Acre defenders. During the siege, Richard caught serious illness. It was probably scurvy or dysentery. His fever exceeded 40 degrees for days. He couldn't walk. Despite his illness, he continued to command on a litter. This determination gave morale to his crew. On July 12th, 1191 Acre finally surrendered. 2,700 Muslim garrison members in the city were captured. Surrender conditions were clear. Saladin would pay ransom, return the True Cross, and release Christian prisoners. Saladin delayed fulfilling the agreement conditions. Richard became impatient, and on August 20th, 1191 made the controversial decision. He ordered the execution of 2,700 Muslim prisoners on Ayadi Hill before Saladin's eyes. Among this number were women and children too. This decision created shock effect in both Muslim and Christian circles. Saladin, in retaliation, killed Christian prisoners in his hands. After this event, Philip Augustus decided to leave the Holy Land. Using his illness as excuse, he returned to France. The real reason was increasing tension between him and Richard. Philip's departure put Richard in a difficult situation because now he had no important ally. In August 1191, Richard began marching toward Jerusalem. The 20,000-person army was advancing in regular formation. Heavily armored knights protected the center. Saladin was expecting this movement and was trying to wear down crusaders by applying guerrilla tactics. Muslim cavalry units were constantly making side attacks, then withdrawing quickly. This tactic aimed to break the Crusader army's morale. Richard gave disciplined advance order and didn't allow soldiers to break formation. On September 7th, 1191, near Arsuf, Saladin launched great offensive. Muslim army had a strong composition of 30,000 people. While Saladin was positioned in center, experienced emirs commanded right and left wings. Richard followed a careful strategy. By keeping his army in a tight formation, he met Muslim attacks. His aim was to wear down enemy forces and launch counterattack at the right moment. This was a tactic requiring patience because soldiers were under pressure. The battle began in morning hours. Muslim archers rained intense arrows. Crusader armor largely met these attacks, but losses were increasing. Richard constantly appeared on front lines to keep his army's morale high. At noon, Saladin gave general attack order. Muslim cavalry tried to break through Crusader lines. The most violent attack was made on Hospitaller Knights. These units' resistance determined the battle's fate. Richard waited for the critical moment. Enemy forces had tired, become dispersed. At this time, he gave heavy cavalry attack order. Western knights charged into enemy lines and split the Muslim army in two. This counterattack determined the battle's outcome. Saladin's army began to scatter. Muslim cavalry units lost order while withdrawing. Richard's military tactics had succeeded. Patient defense, followed by sudden and powerful attack. The Arsuf victory raised Richard's military reputation. Even Saladin began to appreciate his courage and tactical ability. Muslim sources mention Richard with respect, emphasizing he was a fair enemy. This victory also significantly raised Crusader army morale. However, this military success didn't take Richard directly to Jerusalem. Saladin had surrounded the city with strong defense lines, had prepared for a situation requiring long siege. Also, worrying news was beginning to come to Richard from Europe. His brother John was trying to start rebellion in England. Philip Augustus was making attack preparations in Normandy and Anjou lands. These political pressures were causing Richard to have hesitations about the Jerusalem operation. In November 1191, Richard approached to only 20 kilometers from Jerusalem. Crusader soldiers could see the city's domes, but Richard couldn't make the decision to attack. The army's morale had broken, losses had increased, winter was approaching. During this critical period, Richard made a strategic evaluation. Jerusalem siege could last months. Great losses could be given. If the situation in Europe worsened, he could lose his kingdom. In light of these calculations, he made the withdrawal decision. This decision would bother Richard throughout his life. He had passed into history as the king who saw Jerusalem, but couldn't take it. However, objectively evaluated, this decision was logical. The year 1192 passed with diplomatic negotiations. Negotiation traffic began between Richard and Saladin. Both leaders were tired from long war, had entered peace search. Saladin appreciated Richard's courage, thought agreement with him was possible. Richard also made a strategic move by having Ascalon Castle rebuilt. This castle controlled the critical route between Egypt and Syria, and was the weakest link of Saladin's empire. Saladin had previously destroyed this castle's fortifications because he knew the threat of it falling into Crusaders' hands. Richard's refortifying Ascalon was directly threatening Saladin's supply lines. Negotiations were complex. Crusaders wanted Jerusalem, but for Muslims, the city was religiously indispensable. The Ascalon matter was also one of the most controversial items because the castle cut Saladin's Egypt-Syria connection. Reportedly, Richard also brought up unusual proposals during this period, like his sister Joanna marrying Saladin's brother Al-Adil. Joanna had rejected this idea. Finally, on September 2nd, 1192, the Treaty of Ramla was signed. With this treaty, Christians kept the coastal strip and important ports. Jerusalem remained under Muslim control, but Christian pilgrims were allowed to visit the city. On the Ascalon matter, Saladin's demand was accepted. The castle's fortifications would be destroyed and returned to Muslim control. Also, exchange of war prisoners was envisaged. After signing the treaty, Richard left the Holy Land. He was leaving without entering Jerusalem, returning without achieving his main goal. This situation deeply wounded him. On the ship, he watched the Holy Land shores for the last time, feeling he would never return. The return journey was a complete nightmare for Richard. Instead of going directly to England, he had to follow secret routes. Philip Augustus and other enemies were waiting to capture him. He decided to go by land via the Adriatic. This route also had risks. Duke Leopold of Austria held grudge against Richard. At Acre, Richard had humiliated him by not raising Leopold's flag. This diplomatic discourtesy would cause great trouble for Richard. In December 1192, Richard was captured near Vienna. Leopold captured him and handed him over to German Emperor Henry VI. The emperor saw Richard as a valuable card. He could use him both as political pressure tool and financial resource. The emperor's ransom demand was of enormous size, 100,000 marks of silver. This amount was equivalent to twice England's annual income. Paying the ransom risked bankrupting the kingdom. Also, there were political conditions. Richard would become German vassal. Richard's captivity created great crisis in England. His mother, Eleanor, tried every way to save her son. Church treasuries were seized, nobles' properties were confiscated, extra taxes were taken from peasants. The people were paying great price because of Richard's crusade adventure. During this period, his brother John tried to take advantage of the opportunity. He opposed paying Richard's ransom, tried to seize the kingdom. He also made secret agreements with Philip II. John's betrayal permanently damaged his relationship with Richard. In 1194, the ransom was paid, and Richard was released. When he returned to England, chaos was in the country. John had almost seized the kingdom. Philip Augustus had attacked Normandy lands. Richard quickly brought the situation under control. He forgave John, but his trust in him was shaken. Richard, who stayed in England only 2 months, crossed to Normandy again. He started intensive military operations to repel Philip Augustus's attacks. Between 1194 to 1199, Richard lived in constant state of war. He had to protect Normandy, Anjou and Aquitaine lands from Philip Augustus's attacks. Wars during this period were far from Crusade romanticism, were pure political and territorial struggles. During these years, Richard made important military reforms. He had a revolutionary castle built called Château Gaillard. This castle housed the most advanced defense technologies of the period, controlled the Seine Valley. The castle also showed Richard's engineering skill. Philip Augustus followed different strategy. He preferred to use diplomacy and intrigue instead of direct confrontation. He was trying to create rebellions among Richard's vassals, focusing on breaking the alliance system. During this period, both kings had aged. Crusade energy was lost. Richard's war tactics were still effective, but not as successful as before. The fatigue brought by age, the accumulation of long years, was showing itself. In 1199, during a small military operation in the Limousin region, an unfortunate event happened. He was managing the siege of a small castle called Chalus-Chabrol. Such operations had now become routine. Instead of great wars, he was capturing small castles. During the siege, a crossbowman on one of the castle turrets targeted Richard. The arrow pierced Richard's left shoulder. At first it didn't seem serious, but it was understood that the arrow's metal remained inside. The extraction operation failed, and the wound began to get infected. As days passed, Richard's condition worsened. Gangrene symptoms appeared. Fever rose. The period's medical capabilities were insufficient. There was no antibiotic. Richard's strong body couldn't fight the infection. On April 6, 1199, Richard lost his life at Chalus. Before his death, he forgave the archer who shot him and released him. This action showed his last-minute mercy. He died at 42 years old and left no male heir behind. The English throne passed to his brother John. Richard's body was buried at Fontevraud Abbey, his heart in Rouen, his intestines at Chalus, where he died during siege. This triple burial tradition was among the period's aristocratic customs. Richard's death led to conflicting reactions from different circles. English chroniclers commemorated him as the hero king who tried to save the Holy Land. French sources recorded that the powerful enemy they fought against England had died. On the other hand, his military abilities were indisputable. Tactical success at Arsuf, determination at Acre Siege, speed in Cyprus operation. These made him one of the most competent commanders of the period. Earning respect against a great rival like Saladin was an important success. However, politically, Richard was a problematic leader. He preferred to use force instead of diplomacy, had difficulty making long-term strategic plans. The Acre massacre showed his ruthless side, his captivity the price of his strategic mistakes. Modern historians generally evaluate him as a failed king. This is the true story of Richard the Lionheart. See you in the next video. Goodbye.